Imagine dedicating your entire life to building peace, only to have the galaxy sentence your whole species to death for being too good. That was the position Ambassador Elena Vance found herself in, standing in a chamber older than the stars, facing 12 beings who held the fate of humanity in their alien hands. After 40 years of shaking hands with creatures who didn't have them, learning 17 languages, and believing she had secured our place in the cosmos, it was all crashing down. What would you do? Let me know in the comments below, and stick around to hear what she did. The verdict was in before the trial even began. The Grand Archon of the Valari, a towering, slender creature whose scales shimmered from blue to purple, delivered the sentence. His voice was like ice water filling the ancient hall. "The council has reached its decision," he announced, his moon-like eyes cold and distant. "Humanity is found guilty." Elena didn't even blink. She'd seen this coming for 6 months. She'd seen it in the sideways glances, heard it in the whispers that died the moment a human entered the room. It wasn't hatred that condemned them. It was fear. Guilty of what, exactly? Elena's voice was steady, calm. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crack. The Archon waved a thin, graceful arm, and a holographic screen flickered to life. It showed human ships zipping between stars, bustling colonies, scientists buzzing in their labs. 40 years ago, you discovered faster than light travel, the Archon intoned. Not unusual, but you did it after only 200 years of exploring space. It took us 3,000. The Kree took 4,000. Elena cut in. Is being a quick learner a crime now? "It's a warning!" boomed a new voice. It was Counselor Dilek, a being who looked like a mountain of living rock with burning orange embers for eyes. "Your species doesn't understand patience. You rush forward without thinking." Elena shot back. "Patience doesn't stop a sun from dying or a planet from freezing over. We didn't have time to wait." The Archon's voice dripped with condescension. "You should have waited for permission. 40 years ago, we welcomed you as a junior member. We gave you trade routes, access to knowledge we spent millions of years gathering. We told you to grow slowly, to learn your place," the Archon continued. "And we have," Elena insisted. "No," the Archon's voice turned sharp as glass. "In just 40 years, you've spread to 112 worlds. Your scientists are dabbling in forbidden technologies. Your military is nearly as large as the hegemonies. And your people, you ask questions that should not be asked." Elena almost laughed. "You're putting us on trial for being curious?" Counselor Dilek leaned forward, his stony form cracking as he moved. "We are putting you on trial because you are dangerous. Every species here learned long ago that some doors must remain closed. But humans," he rumbled, the light in his eyes flaring, "you see a door, and your only thought is to kick it open. You see a boundary, and feel an overwhelming urge to cross it. You see the impossible, and call it a Tuesday." "That's who we are," Elena said, her voice filled with a sudden strength. "Would you rather we be something else?" "We would rather you be safe," the Archon said smoothly, "for everyone's sake." The screen shifted, showing clips of human soldiers in a skirmish, a new weapon being tested, colonies pushing into supposedly protected space. "In less than 3 centuries, the Archon went on, you've fought 11 wars among yourselves. You've built planet killers. You modify your own bodies with machines. You treat the universe like it's your backyard." "The universe belongs to everyone," Elena stated. Counselor Dilek scoffed. "The universe belongs to those who respect it. Humanity doesn't respect. It consumes. It spreads like a wildfire. And wildfires must be contained before they burn down the entire forest." Elena scanned the 12 faces watching her. She saw pity, anger, and even relief. but she saw no hint of mercy. "So what's our sentence?" she asked, her voice flat. The Archon rose to his full height, a terrifying 3 meters of ancient power. "Humanity is hereby exiled from Council space," he declared. "All your colonies will be evacuated. Your people will be gathered and transported to the edge of known space. We'll give you your ships and enough supplies to last 5 years. After that, you're on your own." "Exiled where?" Elena asked, a cold dread finally seeping in. The Archon gestured to the screen, which now showed a patch of space so black it looked like a hole in reality. No stars, no nebulae, just an endless suffocating void. "The umbral expanse. It lies beyond the galactic rim," the Archon explained. "A graveyard of dead stars in broken space. No one has ever gone there because there is nothing to find, no resources, no life, no hope." "You're sending us there to die," Elena said softly. "We are sending you away," the Archon corrected her. "Whether you die is up to you. If you are as resilient as you claim, you will find a way. If not, the galaxy will be a safer place." A feeling like solid ice formed in Elena's chest. It wasn't fear or anger. It was resolve. "How long do we have?" she asked. 3 months. "Any human ship that crosses back into our territory will be destroyed. No warnings." The chamber was utterly silent. Elena locked eyes with each of the 12 council members, searing their faces into her memory. They would not be forgotten. "May I say one last thing?" she asked. The Archon gave a slight nod. Elena stood up straight, feeling the weight of her years but also the fire of her species. "You're making a terrible mistake," she said, her voice ringing with clarity. "Not because we'll be back for revenge, but because you see fire and think only of destruction. You forget that fire is also warmth. It's light. It's the very thing that pushes back the dark." She pointed a trembling finger at the inky blackness on the screen. "You're throwing us into the darkest corner of the universe, thinking it will extinguish us. But you're wrong. Humanity was born in the dark. We huddled in caves surrounded by things with claws and teeth, with nothing but a campfire to keep us safe. We don't just survive in the dark," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "We learned how to make the dark afraid of us." The Archon's face remained a perfect, unreadable mask. "Fine words. They won't help you out there." "No," Elena agreed. "They won't. But our children's children will remember this day. They will remember you, and one day we'll all see who is on the right side of history." She turned and walked towards the massive doors, her footsteps the only sound. "Ambassador Vance," the Archon called out. She paused. "Do not hope for that day," he warned. "We have watched empires rise and fall for 1,000,000 years. The expanse will swallow you, and in 1,000 years, no one will even remember the name human." A small, secret smile touched Elena's lips. "Then you have absolutely nothing to worry about, do you?" she said, and walked out into the hall. The evacuation was a brutal 3-month nightmare. 300 million people were ripped from their homes, allowed to bring only what they could carry. Elena watched from the bridge of the flagship, the horizon's edge, as a ragtag fleet of thousands of ships assembled. There were mighty warships next to converted cargo haulers and mining platforms that looked like they were held together with little more than duct tape and a prayer. This was the human race heading into exile. Captain Marcus Chen, the best navigator they had, stood beside her. He was young, just 40, but his eyes looked ancient. 300 million souls, he murmured. And a 5-year clock. Elena looked out at the endless sea of ships against the starfield. "Then, we have 5 years to find a new home," she said, her voice full of a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Marcus gestured toward the void ahead. "There's nothing out there, Elena. Council probes mapped it. Dead space. The laws of physics supposedly get weird. Elena turned to him, her tired eyes shining with that old human fire. Then we'll write new laws. Marcus stared at her, and in his eyes, she saw the same look she'd seen on countless human faces for the last 3 months. It was a mix of fear and something else, a stubborn, defiant spark. "You really think we can pull this off?" he asked, his voice low. "I think we don't have a choice," Elena replied. "And when humans have no choice, we find a way. We always do." Just then, the last of the refugee ships joined their ragtag fleet. 300 million souls, all that was left of humanity out here in the stars. Surrounding them were the Council's warships, weapons hot, making sure no one made a run for it. This was it. Elena opened a channel to every single ship, her face appearing on every screen before every person about to be thrown into the empty darkness. "My name is Elena Vance," she began. "Most of you already know me. For the last 40 years, I've fought to find us a place in the galactic community, and I failed. Today, we're being exiled, cast out like garbage because the Council is scared of what we might become." She paused, feeling the silent attention of 300 million people hanging on her every word. "I'm not going to lie to you," she said, her voice steady. "The road ahead is going to be tough. A lot of us won't make it. The Umbrial Expanse is a place of darkness and danger, and we're flying in blind. But I need you to remember something. Remember it on the days you feel like giving up. Remember it when the darkness seems like it will never end. Remember it when you feel like all hope is lost." She leaned into the camera, and her eyes blazed with a fire that 3 months of constant defeat couldn't extinguish. "We are human," she declared. "We sailed across oceans in wooden ships. We climbed mountains with our bare hands. We walked on the moon when our computers were less powerful than the phones in our pockets. We have stared extinction in the face 100 times, and every single time we survived, not because we were the strongest or the smartest, but because we simply refused to die." She pointed a finger toward the terrifying blackness beyond the fleet. "That is the Umbrial Expanse. The Council thinks it's going to be our tomb. They think they're watching the end of humanity, but they are dead wrong. They're watching the beginning. Because we aren't just going to survive out there. We're going to build. We're going to grow. We will become something they can't even imagine. And one day, long after they've forgotten our names, we will come back. And on that day, they will remember what it truly means to underestimate humanity." The channel clicked off. For a long, heavy moment, there was only silence across the entire fleet. Then, a sound started to build. It began on one ship, a low rumble, then spread to the next and the next. It wasn't a cheer, and it wasn't a song. It was something deeper, something ancient. It was the sound of 300 million humans taking one unified breath. They were getting ready for the dark, refusing to be afraid. Captain Marcus Chen looked at the screen where Elena's face had been. There were tears in his eyes, but a smile was breaking through. "Give the order," Elena's voice came over his private comm. "Take us home." Marcus nodded. He turned to his crew and spoke the words that would change the course of human history forever. "All ships, prepare for jump. Destination, the Umbrial Expanse." The engines of 3,000 ships roared to life as one. The stars around them warped and stretched as space itself began to bend. The Council warships just watched in silence, their crews relieved that the human problem was finally over. The horizon's edge was the very last ship to jump. Elena stood at the main viewport, watching as the galaxy she knew faded away. She saw the distant lights of the worlds humans had built, the colonies they had settled, and all the dreams they were being forced to abandon. "We will remember," she whispered. "And one day, we will return. The ship jumped, the light vanished, and humanity plunged into the dark. The first glimpse of the umbreal expanse was enough to steal the breath from every person who saw it. It was nothing, absolutely nothing. The main screens were pure black. The sensors picked up nothing but total silence. Where there should have been stars, there was only a void. Where there should have been light, there was only a cold, crushing emptiness. Standing on the command deck, Elena felt the sheer weight of that darkness pressing in on her. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, she felt a sliver of genuine fear. "Report," she said softly. Captain Chen was staring at his console, his face pale. The fleet made it through. All ships accounted for. But these readings... He shook his head. "I've never seen anything like it. There's just nothing out here. No stars in range, no planets, no asteroids, just empty space." "There has to be something," Elena insisted. "If there is, our sensors can't see it," Chen said, looking up at her. "The council wasn't kidding. This place is dead." Elena walked over to the viewport, pressing her hand against the cold glass as she stared into the abyss. 300 million people, 5 years' worth of supplies, and nothing but an endless void for light years in every direction. It would have been so easy to give in to despair, but Elena Vance had lived for too long and fought too hard to surrender now. "Then we'll find what can't be found," she said. "We'll map the unmappable. We will survive the unsurvivable. This is who we are, Captain. This is what we do." She turned to face her crew. They were terrified. She could see it in their eyes. But underneath that fear was that same stubborn fire that had carried humanity from caves to the stars. "Send a message to the fleet," she ordered. "Tell everyone to get some rest. Tell them to eat. Tell them to hold their families tight, because tomorrow the real work begins. Tomorrow we start building our new home." She glanced back into the darkness one last time. "The council thinks they've gotten rid of us," she murmured. "They're wrong. They've just set us free." The fleet of 3,000 ships, the last hope for humanity, just hung there in the void. All around them, the umbreal expanse waited, dark, silent, and hungry. But humanity had faced the dark before, and humanity had always found a way. The exile was over. The story was just beginning. In the first year alone, the umbreal expanse claimed 100,000 lives, and in ways no one could have predicted. Ship systems failed with no way to repair them. Food supplies dwindled faster than the projections had warned. Bizarre radiation storms would appear out of nowhere, tearing through hulls like they were made of tissue paper. Strange gravitational waves would yank ships off course, sending them spinning into the black, never to be heard from again. But the cruelest killer was something nobody had ever thought to prepare for: the silence. Back in council space, the universe was noisy. Radio signals from 1,000 worlds, the hum of interstellar trade routes, the constant chatter of civilization. But in the expanse, there was nothing. A silence so absolute it felt like it had weight. It pressed in on your mind. It haunted your dreams. It whispered that you were completely and utterly alone, in a universe that couldn't care less if you lived or died. For some, it was too much. They just gave up. They stopped eating, stopped talking. They would just sit and stare into space until their hearts quit. The doctors called it void sickness. Everyone else called it the quiet death. Elena Vance died in the 3rd month, not from the silence, but from something far more ordinary. Her heart, worn out from decades of fighting for her people, finally gave out. She passed away peacefully in her sleep aboard the horizon's edge. Captain Marcus Chen stood over her body and cried, and he wasn't ashamed of it. Elena was more than a leader. She was the glue that held them all together, the fire that refused to be put out. He had no idea how they'd go on without her, but he knew they had to. They held a funeral service that was broadcast to every ship. 300 million people watched as her body was released into the void she had promised they would conquer. Marcus gave the eulogy, speaking words that would be passed down for generations. Elena Vance believed that humanity could survive anything, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She believed we were stronger than the dark, smarter than the silence, and more stubborn than the universe itself. Today, we prove her right. Not by grieving her, but by living for her. We will survive, we will build, we will remember. The fleet pressed on. The darkness remained. By the 5th year, everything was different. The fleet wasn't a fleet anymore. It was a sprawling cluster of floating cities, all connected by cables, makeshift bridges, and sheer desperation. They stripped ships for parts, rebuilt engines, and expanded living quarters by physically latching vessels together, creating massive habitats that grew with each passing month. Marcus Chen was now Fleet Admiral, a title he never wanted but had to accept. He spent his days trying to solve impossible problems. How do you grow food with no sun? How do you create fuel with no stars to mine? How do you keep 300 million people from giving up when the universe itself seems to want them dead? The answer, he found, was to stop playing by the old rules. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was a physicist who was considered a genius long before the exile. Back in council space, she was always exploring the very edges of known science, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. The council had been nervous about her work. Some even whispered it was one of the reasons they'd kicked humanity out. But out here, in the Umbrial expanse, there was no one to tell her to stop. The council was wrong about this place, she told Marcus one day. They were in her lab, a space cobbled together from salvaged ship components. All around them, strange instruments hummed and blinked, measuring things that didn't even have names yet. They told him this stretch of space was a dead, empty wasteland. But they were wrong. It wasn't dead, just different. Yuki pointed to a flickering monitor, her face lit by the eerie glow. On the screen, bizarre patterns swirled, impossible energy readings that defied every known law of science. "What in the world am I looking at?" Marcus breathed. "The universe has rules, Marcus," Yuki explained. "Laws of physics born in the Big Bang, governing everything from tiny atoms to massive galaxies. But this place," she gestured to the inky blackness outside the viewport, "this place is older than that. It's a leftover from whatever came before. And out here, the old rules don't apply." Marcus could only stare. "Are you saying physics just works differently out here?" he asked, struggling to grasp it. "I'm saying physics is more like a gentle suggestion," Yuki replied with a wild, excited glint in her eyes. "The council sent us here to fade away and die, but they made one tiny mistake. They exiled us to the one place in the entire universe where we could rewrite the rule book." The breakthrough started as a trickle, then became a flood. Yuki's team discovered that when you expose certain materials to the strange energies of the expanse, they transformed. Metals grew unbelievably strong. Fuels burned hotter and cleaner. They were even redesigning engines to run on power sources the council couldn't even dream of. And they weren't the only ones. Other scientists stumbled upon pockets of strange matter drifting in the void, the ancient guts of stars that had died before our universe was even born. They discovered gravitational currents. They could ride like cosmic rivers, letting ships cross insane distances using almost no fuel. They even found dimensions tucked away inside of other dimensions, little pocket universes where nothing made sense. The children born in this exile grew up with these wonders as their normal. They'd never felt the warmth of a real sun or seen a blue sky. They were born in darkness, raised in silence, and molded by the void itself. They started calling themselves the Void-born, and they were nothing like the humans who came before. Their eyes could pierce through near-total darkness. Their bodies were perfectly adapted to bizarre gravitational fields and crushing pressures. Their minds worked in ways their own parents couldn't quite follow, shaped by a universe that played by a different set of rules. And the dark? They weren't afraid of it. It was the only home they'd ever known. 20 years after being cast out, humanity had stopped its death spiral. Their makeshift floating cities had grown into permanent stations, built from metals mined from rogue planets and dead stars. Sprawling farms grew food under artificial suns, powered by energy the Council would have declared impossible. Factories churned out incredible new machines using techniques no one had ever imagined. The population had dropped to a terrifying 200 million, but the decline had stopped. Soon, births started to match deaths. Then, they began to outpace them. Slowly, cautiously, humanity was growing again. Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen was an old man now. His hair was snow-white and his body frail, but his mind was as sharp as ever, his will unbreakable. He was the man who had kept them all alive through the darkest years. Now, he saw a new dawn breaking. "We have to stop thinking like refugees," he declared at a meeting of the new council, a room filled with leaders from every station and ship in their growing network. The old council wanted us to die out here. They expected we'd tear each other apart fighting over scraps. But that's not what happened, is it? He gestured to the screens that filled the room, showing vibrant images of their stations, ships, and factories. "We are building," he said, his voice ringing with strength. "We are growing. We're becoming something new. It's time we accept who we are. We are not survivors anymore. We are pioneers, and this darkness isn't our prison, it's our home." A hush fell over the room. Then, one by one, heads began to nod. Everyone had felt it, the profound change the exile had forced on them. Humanity was no longer the species that had been banished from known space. They had been reforged by the void, shaped by the silence, and hardened in the endless night. They had become stronger, stranger, and something the Council could never have predicted. 40 years after the exile, Marcus Chen passed away. He died peacefully in his sleep, just like his wife Elena had. He was 90 years old, ancient by the standards of the old world, and a legend among the people he had saved. His final words were whispered to his daughter, Sarah, a void-born woman who had inherited his uncanny talent for navigation. "Don't forget," he rasped. "Don't you ever forget why we're here, what they did to us, and what we're building." Sarah held her father's hand until it grew cold. Then, with dry eyes and a steel spine, she walked out to address the council. "My father is gone," she announced, "but his work is not over. We have survived for 40 years in a place that should have been our tomb. We built homes out of nothing but darkness. We have made this void our own, but we are not done." She pointed to a star map where the umbral expanse stretched out infinitely. "Out there, beyond our farthest station, beyond our fastest ship, there is more. More space, more resources, and more secrets just waiting for us. My father taught us how to live. Now, it's time to do more than just survive. It's time to explore. It's time to expand. It's time for us to build an empire." The council roared its approval. The age of survival was over. The age of expansion had just begun. By the 60th year, humanity's new territory was already larger than everything they had lost. Secret stations peppered the darkness like defiant new stars. Some were carved deep into asteroids, others simply floated in the void, held together by gravitational fields that literally bent space. A few were even nestled inside the cooling corpses of brown dwarfs, sipping the last bits of heat from long-dead stars. Their technology had soared past anything the Council had ever developed. Their ships could fold space and slip between dimensions. Their weapons could rip holes in the fabric of reality. Their sensors could see through existence itself and detect things that shouldn't be possible. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was long gone, but her legacy lived on through her students and her children. Her own granddaughter, Yuki Tanaka Chen, had inherited her grandmother's genius and her iron will. She was now the head of a team of scientists who were constantly shattering the limits of what humanity could achieve. "The Council thought they were sentencing us to death," she said during a research presentation. "Instead, they sent us to the one place in the universe that would force us to evolve. The umbral expanse isn't empty. It's bursting with possibilities they were just too terrified to even look for. And now we are exploring them all." She showed the audience stunning images of their new tech, ships that moved through shadows, weapons that no shield could ever block, communication systems that were instant across any distance, and power plants that drew limitless energy from the vacuum of space itself. "This is what we have become," she said proudly, "not refugees, not exiles. We are the masters of the void, and the void has made us powerful." 75 years after the exile, humanity was ready. Not for war, not quite yet, but they were ready for something else, ready to finally look back at the galaxy they were forced to leave, ready to see what the Council had become without them, and ready to start planning for the future. Humanity's new leader was a man named Alexander Volkov. He was tall and slender, with the pale skin and night-adapted eyes of a true void-born. He was born in the darkness, raised in the silence, and had never once felt the warmth of a real sun. But he knew the stories, he knew his history, he knew what the Council had done to his people, and he had never forgiven them for it. "We have built something extraordinary," he said to a grand assembly of all the station leaders. "An empire in the shadows, a civilization in the void. But we didn't build it because we wanted to. We built it because we had to, because the Council decided humanity had no right to exist among the stars." He scanned the room, looking at the faces of his people, void-born and earth-born, young and old, all of them bound together by the shared scar of betrayal. "We have spent 75 years building our strength," he said, his voice low and dangerous. 75 years learning secrets the Council can't even fathom. 75 years preparing for the day we would meet them again. That day isn't today, but it's coming. He touched a control, and a massive map of the galaxy lit up the room. Council space was a comfortable, bloated glow of blue, and at the very edge of everything was the umbral expanse, a black shadow creeping along its border. "They think we're dead," Volkov said with a grim smile. "They've forgotten our names. They probably tell stories about us to scare their children, but we are not dead. We are waiting. And when the time is right, we are going to remind them exactly who we are." The room exploded into a deafening roar. 75 years of pain, struggle, and loss had forged humanity into something new, something hard, something terrifyingly patient. The Council had thrown them into the darkness to die. Instead, the darkness had made them stronger than ever before. The umbral dominion was born, and the galaxy had absolutely no idea what was coming for it. In the quiet of her lab, Yuki Tanaka Chen was putting the final touches on her masterpiece. She was nearly 70 now, an old woman, but her mind was sharper than ever. She dedicated her entire life to unlocking the secrets of the expanse, to pushing past every known limit. And now, She was on the verge of her greatest creation, a ship that could move through shadows, a ship that could materialize anywhere, at any time, without warning. A ship that was impossible to detect, impossible to stop, and impossible to defeat. She called it the Shadow Drive. "This is how we go home," she whispered, a lifetime of purpose in her voice. "This is how we show them what we've become." She smiled, thinking of her grandmother, the woman who had first believed that this empty darkness was actually full of infinite possibilities. She remembered the legends, Marcus Chen, the man who held humanity together during the darkest years, Elena Vance, who stared down the council with fire in her eyes before they cast her people out. They all believed humanity was unbreakable, that our spirit could endure anything. And they were right. As Yuki finalized her tasks, the station hummed with life around her. Outside, in the silent void, 1,000 hidden warships lay in wait, and on them, 1,000,000,000 human hearts beat with a slow, patient thunder. The Council had tried to erase humanity, tossing us into the shadows, hoping we'd just fade away. But we didn't. We took the shadows and made them our own. And very, very soon, the Council was going to find out what that really meant. The long night was ending. The age of shadows was about to begin. For 100 years after the exile, the galaxy forgot we even existed. In Council space, it was business as usual. The big powers postured, traded, and signed treaties that were worthless. The smaller species served their masters, dreaming of a freedom that would never arrive. And the 12 so-called elder races sat on their thrones, convinced they ran the universe. They told stories about us. Parents would scare their kids with tales of the arrogant humans who reached too high and got burned. Teachers used us as the prime example of what happens when you don't know your place. Politicians would point to the empty expanse where we were banished and call it proof of the Council's great wisdom. Nobody knew we were still out there. Nobody even suspected that in the deep dark beyond the edge of the galaxy, an empire was rising. An empire built on patience, secrecy, and a burning hunger for justice. They called themselves the Umbral Dominion, and they saw everything. Supreme Commander Alexander Volkov stood in the heart of Shadow Station Prime, the biggest and most secret base the Dominion had. It was carved into the dead core of a brown dwarf, a failed star that gave off just enough heat to keep the lights on. From the outside, it was invisible, just another chunk of rock drifting through the endless night. But on the inside, it was the bustling center of human civilization. Volkov was 130 years old. The medical tech we'd developed in the dark had stretched our lives far beyond anything the Council could imagine. He'd been leading the Dominion for 50 years, transforming his people from desperate survivors into masters of the dark. He had watched a fleet of refugees grow into an empire of shadows, and right now he was watching the Council rot from within. "Show me the latest," he said to the woman at his side. Commander Yuki Tanaka Chen was old too, but her eyes were just as sharp as ever. She had her grandmother's genius and her great-grandfather's unshakable will. She dedicated her life to creating the tech that kept the Dominion invisible, the stealth probes, the quantum-entangled spies, the shadow networks that let us watch the galaxy without anyone knowing we were there. She brought up a massive screen that covered an entire wall of the command center. Images flashed across it, ships, stations, planets, all marked with the symbols of the Council races. "The Valari are on their way out," Yuki said. "Their birth rates have been plummeting for centuries. They're down to less than 2 billion of them left total. Their scientists can't fix it. By their own estimates, they'll be extinct in 500 years. Volkov watched the images of once gleaming Valari cities, now half deserted and crumbling. "What else?" he asked. "The Kree hegemony is on the move again." Yuki switched the view to show massive warships gliding through space. They've conquered 3 new species in the last 10 years. They say it's for security, but our intel shows they're just stripping those worlds bare for resources. Their own planets are running dry. And then there are the Orium, Yuki's voice went icy. Remember the protected worlds, the ones the Council declared off-limits because of their unique life? The Orium have been secretly mining them for centuries. They've wiped out at least 12 species just to fuel their economy. And the Council does nothing, Volkov finished, because the Orium pay the biggest chunk of the defense budget. He watched the proof scroll across the screen. Videos of plundered planets, images of enslaved people, data streams showing corruption and cruelty that would have horrified the humans exiled 200 years ago. The Council hasn't changed a bit, he said softly. No, Yuki agreed. They're the same as they always were. They threw us out because they were afraid we'd upset their perfect order. But their order was built on lies and suffering. They were never wise elders. They were just bullies with bigger ships. Volkov turned from the screen. He walked to a viewport staring out into the starless black. He'd been born in this darkness. It didn't scare him. What's our fleet strength? He asked. 12,000 combat vessels, Yuki replied instantly. All of them have shadow drive technology. All of them are crewed by void-born soldiers who've trained for this moment their entire lives. We also have another 50,000 support ships, more than enough to supply a long war. And our weapons? Phase disruptors that slice through any shield the Council has. Null torpedoes that can rip a hole in space-time. Shadow bombs that can literally delete matter from existence. Yuki paused. We could shatter them, Alexander. We could wipe the Council off the map and take everything for ourselves. Volkov was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head. No, he said. That's not why we spent 200 years building this. We are not conquerors. We are not destroyers. If we become the monsters they always claimed we were, then they were right to kick us out. Then what are we? Yuki asked. Volkov turned to face her, his eyes, so used to the dark, seeming to hold their own light. We are the reckoning, he said. We are the consequence they never thought they'd have to face. We're not here to destroy the Council. We're here to expose them, to show the galaxy who they really are. And then, we'll let the galaxy decide their fate. It took another 100 years to get everything perfect. Humanity had learned a deep patience out in the darkness. We learned to plan across generations, not just years. We learned that the greatest victories are the ones that, looking back, seem like they were always meant to happen. In that century, the Dominion only grew stronger. We invented new technologies, built new ships, and trained new soldiers. But the most important weapon we forged was our intelligence network, which spread through Council space like an invisible web. Our stealth probes drifted through their systems, recording everything. Our quantum communicators sent that data back to us instantly, no matter the distance. We had human agents, surgically altered to look like other species, walking the halls of power in every single Council government. We learned it all. We knew which officials were corrupt and which were true believers. We knew which commanders would fight to the bitter end and which would fold at the first sign of real trouble. We mapped every secret base, every hidden weapon, every crime they had ever buried. We built a database that knew more about the Council than the Council knew about itself, and we waited for the perfect moment to use it. 190 years after the exile, Supreme Commander Volkov passed away. He died peacefully, with his family and closest advisors around him. He was 220 years old, ancient even for us. He had led humanity for a century and a half. He had taken a ragtag fleet of refugees and forged an empire that could have crushed the galaxy. His last words were for his successor, a woman named Mira Volkov-Chen. She was his great-granddaughter, the union of our two most legendary families. She had his iron will and Yuki Tanaka Chen's sharp mind. She was exactly who we needed for the next step. "Remember the goal," Volkov whispered. "Not conquest, not revenge, justice. Show them who we are, show them what they did, and then give them a choice." Mira held his hand until he was gone. Then she rose and faced the assembled leaders. "My great-grandfather spent his life building to this moment," she said. "He believed we could be better than our enemies. He believed we could win without becoming what they feared." Her eyes swept across the room. "I share that belief, and I will honor him by finishing the job." She activated the main display. A map of the galaxy appeared, with Council space in blue and the Umbral Dominion in black. The black was so much bigger than anyone in Council space could possibly imagine. "We have spent 200 years building our strength," Mira said. "We have watched the Council. We have learned their secrets. We have prepared our forces, and now, finally, we are ready." She touched a control, and the map lit up. Red lines shot out, showing attack routes. Green dots appeared, marking the positions where our ships were already hiding. Yellow markers highlighted critical targets. "In 3 years we will begin our return," Mira announced. "Not with an invasion, not with a war. We will strike them with something far more powerful, the truth. We are going to show the galaxy everything the Council is. We will expose every crime, every lie, every betrayal. And then we will offer them all something better." The room was absolutely silent. Everyone knew exactly what she meant. This was more than just a battle plan. It was the closing of a chapter 200 years in the making. "My great-grandfather was cast out of Council space 2 centuries ago," Mira explained, her voice steady. "They told him humanity didn't belong among the stars. They said we were too reckless, too driven, too proud. But he never bought it, and neither will I." Her gaze swept across the room, locking eyes with every captain, every strategist, every leader present. "We are humanity," she declared. "We were born into darkness, raised in silence, and forged in the empty void. And now, we're going home." The 3 years that followed were the most intense in the entire history of the Umbral Dominion. Mighty fleets gathered in the deep dark, just a breath away from Council space territory. Sleeper agents, dormant for years, were activated inside every major government. A massive communications network was primed to hijack every single frequency across the galaxy. Everything was checked, double-checked, and then triple-checked for good measure. Mira Vulov Chen was a whirlwind of motion, overseeing every last detail. She pored over intelligence briefs, signed off on attack strategies, and personally recorded the messages that would soon echo across the stars. She barely ate, hardly slept, and never, ever stopped moving. "You're going to work yourself into an early grave," warned her chief advisor, an old man named Thomas who had served her family for 3 generations. "I'll rest when we're done," Mira shot back. "That's what your great-grandfather used to say," Thomas countered, shaking his head. "And his father before him. Humanity scraped by for 200 years in the void. You need to make sure you're around to see the home we've built." Mira actually stopped for a moment. She gazed out the viewport at the endless black that had been her only home. Out there, just past the edge of their territory, the Council went about their lives, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to break. "Do you remember the old stories?" she asked softly. "The ones they tell about the first days of the exile?" "I remember," Thomas said. "Elena Vance promised the Council that humanity would remember this. She told them that one day we would all see who made the right call." Mira turned back to him, her eyes shining. "I'm going to prove she was right," she said. "I'm going to show this galaxy that humanity isn't the monster the Council feared. We're the miracle they should have been praying for." A slow smile spread across Thomas's face. In that case, you'd better get some sleep. History tends to need its witnesses to be wide awake. For the first time in months, Mira actually laughed. 3 more years, she promised. Then we'll show them exactly who we are. And so, 203 years after being cast out, everything was in place. 12,000 warships lay waiting in the shadows. 50,000 support ships were loaded with enough supplies to fuel a war that could last for decades. And 1 billion human soldiers stood ready to fight for a home they had only ever seen in pictures. Communication dishes were aimed at every single populated planet in the galaxy. Mira Vulov-Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, a colossal vessel named the Shadow's Edge. It was, without a doubt, the most advanced ship ever constructed, packed with technology the Council couldn't even dream of. It could materialize anywhere in the blink of an eye. It could outfight any opponent. It was, simply put, unstoppable. Around her, the crew moved with silent efficiency. These were the Voidborn, soldiers with eyes adapted to utter darkness and bodies engineered for survival. They were engineers who could practically rebuild a starship in the middle of a dogfight, and scientists who knew the secrets of the void better than the Council knew their own laws of physics. They were ready. After 2 centuries of planning, they were finally ready. "Open a channel to the entire fleet," Mira ordered. The communications officer gave a crisp nod. "Channel open, Commander." Mira took a deep, centering breath. This was it. The moment her ancestors had only dreamed of. The moment every human had worked toward since the day they were thrown into the darkness. "My name is Mira Vulov-Chen," she began, her voice ringing with authority. "I am the Supreme Commander of the Umbriel Dominion. 203 years ago, the Galactic Council banished humanity into the dark. They expected us to die. They hoped we would vanish. They wanted us to become nothing but a ghost story to scare their children." She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. "They were wrong," she stated flatly. "We didn't die. We didn't vanish. We survived. We adapted. We built a new empire in the shadows they were too terrified to enter. And now, finally, we are ready to show them what we've become." She took one last look out at the familiar darkness, then turned her fiery gaze directly to the camera. "Today, we begin our return," she announced, "not as refugees begging for a handout, and not as conquerors bent on revenge. We return as humanity, the species that was too dangerous for them to handle, the species that survived the unsurvivable, the species that made the void its home." A smile touched her lips, but it held no warmth. "The Council thinks they know what humanity is," she said. "They're about to get a serious reality check." She nodded to the navigation officer. "All ships," she commanded, her voice like steel. "Execute Operation Homecoming." In an instant, 12,000 ships activated their shadow drives. Space itself seemed to twist and warp as reality bent to their will. After 200 years in exile, humanity was finally on its way home. The whispers from the void were about to become a roar. Councillor Thiel of the Orium Collective was having a fantastic evening. His sprawling estate on the capital world of Orium Prime was packed with the galaxy's most influential figures. Diplomats, generals, CEOs, and royals from 100 different species mingled under crystal chandeliers that were 1,000,000 years old. Servers glided through the throngs of people, offering drinks that cost more than most small planets earn in a decade. It was the party of the century, and Thiel was the star of the show. He had spent his long life clawing his way to the top. He'd made backroom deals that would make the Council's founders turn in their graves. He'd crushed his enemies and swallowed their fortunes whole. He'd committed crimes that would never see the light of day,
because he had the power to make any inconvenient evidence simply disappear. Tonight was a celebration of his masterstroke, a new trade deal that would give his Orium Collective a controlling stake of 60% of all rare mineral mining in Council space. It was the culmination of 50 years of scheming, bribery, blackmail, even assassination, all the standard tools of politics. He raised his glass high, preparing to toast his own genius. The crowd quieted, hanging on his every word. And that's when every screen in the massive ballroom went completely black. Thiel scowled. Technical glitches were not supposed to happen at his parties. He paid people enormous sums to prevent this exact kind of embarrassment. Someone was going to be spaced for this. Just as quickly, the screens flickered back to life, displaying a single face, a human face. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Guests stumbled back, horrified. A few even screamed. It couldn't be. The humans had been wiped out 200 years ago. Everyone knew that. The council had made certain of it. Yet here was a human woman, staring out from every screen, her eyes dark, calm, and completely fearless. "My name is Mira Vulov Chen," she said. "I am the daughter of exiles. I am the great-granddaughter of those you cast into the void, and I am here to give you a message." Thiel's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor. He didn't even notice. 203 years ago, Mira continued, the Galactic Council sentenced humanity to death. Oh, you didn't call it that. You called it exile. You called it mercy. But you shoved 300 million souls into a place where you knew they couldn't possibly survive. You hoped they would just die quietly. "And then," she said, "you forgot all about us." Her face was replaced by a flood of images, fleets of advanced warships emerging from black holes, sprawling space stations that dwarfed planets, cities carved into the hearts of dead stars, technology that made the Council's best gadgets look like children's toys. "They didn't die," Mira's voiceover explained. "They survived, they built, they evolved, and now they're back." The images shifted again, this time showing something far more terrifying to Thiel. They showed documents, videos, and private records that he recognized with a jolt of ice-cold panic. His records. His crimes. The protected planets the Orium had illegally strip-mined, the species they'd casually driven to extinction, the bribes they'd paid, the officials they'd had eliminated. "The Orium Collective has been poisoning this galaxy for centuries," Mira declared. "And here is the proof. Every crooked deal, every covered-up death, every single lie. The Council knew about some of it, of course. They just looked the other way because the Orium lined their pockets so well. But now, everyone will know. The people of the galaxy are about to see the true faces of their so-called leaders." Thiel tried to shout an order, to shut down the screens, to do anything, but his body wouldn't obey. His entire estate's security and communication systems were completely frozen. He was trapped, a powerless spectator at his own execution, surrounded by powerful guests who were watching his empire turn to dust in real time. "This isn't revenge," Mira's voice said, echoing through the stunned silence. "Revenge is too small, too petty for what you did to us. This is justice, and it's only the beginning." The screens went dark for the final time. The room was deathly quiet, save for the sound of Thiel's ragged, panicked breathing. Then came the whispers, the pointed fingers, the accusations, the chaos. And across 1,000 different worlds, the same scene was unfolding. The unvarnished truth about the Council was being blasted on every channel. 200 years of dirty secrets were being aired for all to see. Humanity had come home, and they had brought receipts. The Valari Archon was ancient. He was, in fact, the very same Archon who had condemned humanity to exile 2 centuries ago. His kind lived for millennia, and he remembered that day as if it were yesterday.
He remembered the fire in the human ambassador's eyes. He remembered her promise that humanity would remember. And he remembered the absolute certainty he felt making what he thought was the right decision. Now, sitting alone in his chamber, he watched the galaxy burn and wondered if he'd been terribly wrong. For 3 straight days, the broadcasts had been inescapable. Every species in Council space had seen the proof: the Orium's crimes, the Kree's atrocities, the secret deals and dirty betrayals that held the Council's power together for millions of years. Now, revolts were igniting on 100 worlds as species oppressed for generations finally rose against their masters. Old allies were turning on each other, and the trade routes that were the lifeblood of the galaxy were collapsing. The delicate order the Council had guarded for ages was shattering, and everywhere the chaos erupted, human ships appeared. They'd materialize out of nowhere, like ghosts in the machine, striking supply depots and military bases with surgical precision. They didn't level cities or slaughter civilians, they simply took control. Their soldiers moved through Council defenses as if they were made of mist. The Archon had commanded his fleets to strike back. The mighty Valari Armada, the pride of the elder races, had warped in to intercept the human invaders. They never came back. The reports described ships that couldn't be tracked and weapons that couldn't be stopped, guided by tactics that couldn't be countered. The entire Valari Grand Fleet, 10,000 ships that had enforced Council law for 1,000,000 years, had been boxed in on all sides by vessels that seemed to phase right through their shields like smoke. They weren't destroyed, they were captured. 10,000 ships and millions of soldiers, the whole military might of the Valari people, was taken without a single shot being fired. The Archon's hands shook as he replayed the reports. This wasn't a war. It was a statement. The humans were showing the galaxy they could have crushed the Council at any time. The fact that they chose not to was somehow more terrifying than any invasion. A soft chime echoed in the room. Someone was requesting entry. The Archon hesitated, his heart pounding, then granted access. A human woman walked in. She was tall and pale, with the dark adapted eyes his intelligence briefings had mentioned, wearing a simple uniform with a strange symbol on the shoulder. It was a black sun circled by stars. "Archon," she said, her voice calm. "My name is Commander Yuki Tanaka Chen. I think it's time we had a talk." The Archon just stared, his mind flashing back to another human woman who had stood before him 2 centuries ago. This one had the same fire in her eyes. "How did you get past my guards?" he demanded. "There was no need to harm them," Tanaka Chen replied smoothly. "They're just taking a nap. They'll wake up in a few hours with no memory of our little chat." He swallowed hard. "You could have killed them." "Yes," she agreed. "We could have killed everyone on this planet. We could have wiped out your entire species in a single day." She offered a smile that held absolutely no warmth, but that's not why we're back. The Archon pushed himself up from his seat. Despite his age, despite the terror gripping him, he still had his pride. "Then why are you back? For revenge? To watch us burn?" "No," Tanaka Chen said. "We came back to give you a choice." She tapped a small device, and a hologram of the galaxy bloomed in the air between them. Council space was marked in blue, but another vast region shimmered in black. "This is what we've been building for the 200 years since you exiled us," she explained. "The Umbriel Dominion, a civilization spanning 1,000 hidden worlds and home to 1 billion human souls. We have technologies you can't even dream of and resources you can't possibly count. We could conquer the entire galaxy if we wanted to," she added quietly. "Then why don't you?"
the Archon asked, his voice barely a whisper. Because Elena Vance was right, Tanaka Chen said, her dark eyes locking onto his. She told you humanity would remember. She told you that one day the universe would see who made the right choice. We remember, Archon. Every human child is taught the story of the exile. Every soldier carries the memory of what you did to us. She took a step closer. But we also learned something else out there in the dark, she said. We learned that revenge is a poison. It eats away at the person who wields it far more than its target. If we conquered the Council, burned your worlds, and enslaved your people, we'd become the very monsters you always claimed we were, and we refuse to let that happen.
The Archon was silent for a long time. What do you want from us? He finally asked. The Council is finished, Tanaka Chen stated plainly. Your secrets are out, your alliances are broken, the species you held down are rising up. In a year, maybe 2, there will be nothing left of the order you built. She flicked her wrist, and the hologram vanished. We're offering you a chance to build something better. A new alliance, one not ruled by the strongest, but guided by principles, freedom for all species, justice for all crimes, and cooperation instead of domination. And if we refuse, the Archon challenged. Tanaka Chen just shrugged. Then we'll leave. We have our own civilization. We don't need council space. We came here to offer a choice, not to force your hand. Humanity spent 200 years in exile. We can easily spend another 200 watching you tear yourselves apart. The Archon sank back into his chair, the weight of millennia pressing down on him. He had seen empires rise and fall, made decisions that shaped the fate of galaxies, but he had never faced a choice like this. Why? He asked softly. After everything we did to you, why offer us mercy? Tanaka Chen watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. Because 200 years ago, a woman named Elena Vance walked out of this very chamber with her head held high. She didn't curse you, and she didn't threaten you, she continued. She simply said that humanity would remember. And she was right. We remember everything. She turned toward the door. We remember the exile, the darkness, the friends we lost, and the homes we were forced to leave behind. But we also remember who we are. We are human, the species that survived the unsurvivable, the species that built an empire out of nothing in the void, the species that had every right to seek revenge but chose justice instead. She paused at the doorway and looked back at him one last time. The choice is yours, Archon. You can cling to your pride and watch your civilization crumble to dust, or you can take our hand and help us build something new. Either way, humanity will be just fine. The only question is whether the Valari will be there with us. She stepped out, leaving the ancient Archon a win with his decision. The conflict, if you could even call it that, lasted 8 months. It wasn't really a war, more like a controlled demolition. Human forces would appear exactly where they were needed, securing critical infrastructure and stopping the chaos from spiraling out of control. Council fleets would surrender without a fight once they realized resistance was futile. Governments fell, only to be replaced by provisional councils that answered to their own people. The council's worst crimes were brought to light in open courts. The Orium leaders who had ordered the destruction of protected worlds were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives restoring the very ecosystems they had ruined. The Kree officers behind the massacres were stripped of their ranks and sent to work in hospitals, healing others instead of hurting them. The corrupt officials who had enabled it all were publicly exposed and removed from power. It wasn't gentle and it wasn't painless, but it was profoundly fair.
Every charge was backed by undeniable evidence, and every defendant was given the right to speak. Justice was served, true justice, not vengeance, and through it all, humanity stood by as impartial witnesses. They didn't rule or conquer, they simply made sure the process was fair. "This is not what I expected," the Valari Archon admitted. He was standing on a balcony overlooking the capital city of Valar Prime. Beside him was Supreme Commander Mira Vulov Chen, who had come to oversee the final stages of the transition. "What did you expect?" she asked gently. "Revenge? Annihilation? All the things we were afraid of when we cast you out?" He slowly shook his ancient head. "We were so sure humanity would try to conquer the galaxy that you'd use your power to dominate everyone else. It's what we would have done." "We know," Mira said. "We spent 200 years watching you, learning your secrets, and understanding how you think." She gazed out at the city, where Valari citizens went about their daily lives, mostly untouched by the monumental changes happening around them. "If we had wanted revenge, we could have taken it 100 times over, but that would have meant becoming you. And we decided a very long time ago that we would rather be human." The Archon was quiet for a moment, processing it all. "The Council exiled you because we were afraid of what you might become," he confessed. "We thought that if we didn't stop you, you would eventually threaten our power." "You were right to be afraid," Mira replied. "We did become something threatening. We became something you couldn't control, couldn't predict, and couldn't defeat. But you were wrong about what we would do with that power." She turned to face him, her eyes clear and certain. "Humanity was never going to conquer the galaxy," she said. "We don't want to rule. We want to explore, to learn, and to grow. We just want to see what's beyond the next star, and the next, and the one after that." The Council saw that and called it ambition. It was just simple curiosity, the same drive that took us from living in caves to reaching for the stars. The Archon gave a slow, deliberate nod. "So what's next for humanity, now that the Council is a thing of the past?" A true smile finally broke across Mira's face, the first one since their long journey back began. "We keep going," she declared. "There's a whole universe waiting for us, and we've barely scratched the surface. The umbral expanse showed us that nothing is truly impossible. The void taught us not to be afraid of the dark. We're going to keep pushing boundaries, keep exploring, and keep asking why." She gazed up at the cosmos, and this time, "We want you to come along with us." The ceremony for the declaration was held on neutral territory, a space station positioned at the very heart of the former Council's domain. Beings from every known species were there, filling a massive chamber built just for this occasion. Mira Volkov Chen stood at the podium, and behind her hung a banner with the new alliance symbol, a circle of stars cradling a dark center, representing light embracing the shadow, the known embracing the great unknown. "Today," she announced, "we declare the end of the Galactic Council." And the start of something new, a whisper rippled through the crowd, a mix of hope, fear, and universal uncertainty. "The Council was founded on power," Mira went on the belief that some species were inherently superior to others. They believed the strong had a natural right to dominate the weak, and that the universe was just a resource to be controlled and used up. She let the words hang in the air for a moment. Humanity was cast out because we didn't buy into that vision. We were too curious, too driven, and far too willing to challenge the status quo. The Council saw us as a danger to their precious order. And you know what? They were right. We were a threat. But not because we wanted to conquer them. We were a threat because we refused to believe the universe belonged to any single group. She gestured to the diverse assembly. "Just look at all of you. 100 species, 1,000 worlds, 1,000,000 different ways to experience the cosmos. For far too long, you've been fed the lie that there's only one right way to live, one way to think, one set of rules for everyone. That's just not true.
There are as many ways to exist as there are stars in the night sky. She took a step back from the podium. The Umbral Dominion isn't here to become the new council. We're here with a different offer entirely. A partnership. An alliance founded on mutual respect, not fear. On working together instead of fighting for control, and on the simple idea that every species, no matter how new or how ancient, has something valuable to contribute. Her eyes scanned the room, connecting with beings of 100 different colors and shapes. We're calling this new partnership the Stellar Compact, and it has just one law. Everyone is equal, everyone gets a say, everyone is free to choose their own destiny. If you want to be a part of this, our door is wide open. If you'd rather go it alone, we won't try to stop you. We are not here to be your rulers. We're here to be explorers, and we hope you'll explore right alongside us. She lifted her hand, and the chamber lights began to fade. The ceiling above them turned transparent, unveiling the breathtaking sea of stars. 200 years ago, humanity was thrown into the darkness, she said. Today, we stand in the light, not as conquerors, and certainly not as victims, but as partners and equals. We are a people who survive the unsurvivable, and we chose to share what we learned instead of using it as a weapon. She smiled. The void isn't empty. The darkness isn't the end. The universe is teeming with wonders we can't even begin to imagine. And now, for the very first time, we can discover them together. The chamber exploded with applause. It began with the smaller species, the ones who had been ground under the council's heel for generations. Then the sound swelled, joined by the merchants, the scientists, and the explorers. Eventually, even some of the ancient species joined in, the ones who had grown weary of the council's endless stagnation. Humanity had emerged from the shadows, and they had brought a spark of hope with them. The Stellar Compact was officially born, and the future was just getting started. 5 years had gone by since the council's collapse. The galaxy was still mending itself. Deep wounds don't heal overnight, and the scars left by millions of years of tyranny and exploitation were profound. Some species found it hard to adjust to freedom after generations of being told what to do. Others resented having to let go of the power they'd held for so long. And some just had no idea how to function in a universe where the old playbook had been thrown out. But bit by bit, things were improving. The Stellar Compact had grown far more than anyone had dreamed. It started with just a few species who bought into humanity's vision, but it had since grown to include most of the known inhabited worlds. Trade routes once choked by the Council were now free for all. Technologies that the elder races had selfishly guarded were now being shared openly. The walls that had kept species apart for eons were finally crumbling. And humanity was right in the middle of it all, not as kings, not as conquerors, but as guides, teachers, and partners. The Umbral Dominion had opened its doors, sharing the incredible tech they'd pioneered in the void. Shadow drives were being retrofitted for use by other species. The bizarre sciences discovered in the expanse were now being poured over by researchers from 100 different worlds. The secrets humanity had uncovered during 200 years in exile were laying the groundwork for a brand new age of discovery. Supreme Commander Mira Volkov Chen stood on the capital station's observation deck, watching ships from 100 different species move in peaceful harmony. She was getting older now. Her hair was gray, and her face was etched with the lines of a life dedicated to service. But her eyes were as sharp as ever, and her mind was just as keen. "It's funny," she said to the woman next to her. "I spent my whole life training for war,
planning for the day we'd finally confront the council and show them what we'd become.
And now that it's all done, I'm not really sure what to do with myself. The woman's name was Ara, the newly chosen speaker for the compact assembly. She wasn't human. She was a Valari, considered young for her kind at barely 500 years old. Her scales shimmered under the starlight, shifting between blue and purple with every movement. "You could always retire," Ara offered. "You've more than earned it. The Dominion has other leaders now. The Compact has its own government. Humanity doesn't need you to hold its hand anymore." Mira chuckled. "Humans are awful at retiring. We constantly need to be doing something, moving, exploring, building. It's just baked into our DNA. Is that how your species made it through the expanse?" Ara asked. "Because you just can't sit still? That's part of it." Mira gazed out at the starfield. "But it's also because we're just plain stubborn. We refuse to believe that anything is truly impossible. We see an obstacle and call it a challenge. We see the unknown and call it an opportunity. The council thought they were sending us to our doom. What they actually did was send us to the one place in the entire universe where our stubbornness was the key to survival." The Valari was silent for a moment. She had been raised on stories about humanity, tales of a dangerous species that needed to be kept in check, of a reckless people who would wreck the galaxy if they weren't contained. All those stories had been lies, but old lies are hard to shake. "I wasn't even born when your people were exiled," she said at last. "But my grandfather served on the council. He cast a vote for your banishment." Mira turned to face her. "Does that weigh on you sometimes?" Ara's scales darkened to a deeper shade. He truly believed he was doing the right thing, that he was saving the galaxy from a menace. But he was wrong. And now, here I am, working side by side with the very people he tried to erase. Do you hold yourself responsible for his actions? "No," Ara said, shaking her head. "But I do wonder sometimes, if he had voted the other way, if the council had just given humanity a chance, could we have gotten to this point without all the pain, without 200 years of exile, without all the crimes the council committed while you were gone?" Mira mulled over the question. She thought of Elena Vance, who had stormed out of that council chamber with defiance blazing in her eyes. She thought of Marcus Chen, who had somehow kept the fleet from falling apart during the darkest years. She thought of all the humans born and buried in the void, who never got to feel the warmth of a real sun. "I honestly don't know," she admitted. "Maybe we would have found a different way. Maybe the council would have come around in time. Maybe the whole story would have been different." She turned back to the view screen. "But that isn't what happened," she said softly. "What happened is that they threw us out. What happened is that we survived. What happened is that we created something incredible out there in the darkness, and now we're sharing it with everyone. I can't go back and change the past. All I can do is decide how to live in the present." Ara nodded slowly. "That sounds like a very human way to look at things, is it?" Mira smiled. "I just always figured it was common sense. The memorial was constructed right on the border between the old council space and the umbral expanse. It was a stark, simple monument, nothing more than a pillar of black stone hanging silently in the void. But etched into that stone were names, 300 million names, every single human who was cast out of council space 208 years ago. Most of those names belonged to people who had perished in the early years of the exile, when the food ran out, the ships failed, and the void took its brutal toll. Back when humanity was just fighting to stay alive, and even later, when our dominion was thriving, death was a constant. People passed from old age, from accidents. The simple truth is that nothing lasts forever, even in an age of wonders. But on the memorial wall, some names belonged to people who were still walking among us. They were the last of the original exiles, the ones who could still remember life before the void, who'd witnessed the trial, the verdict, and the long, terrifying journey into nothingness. There weren't many left, maybe a few dozen. Advanced medicine could stretch out a life, but it couldn't grant immortality. One by one, that first generation was slipping away. Today, another name was being etched into the stone. Commander Yuki Tanaka Chen had passed away in her sleep at the age of 243. She was the last of the brilliant minds who had cracked the secrets of the expanse. It was her work that led to the Shadow Drive. She spearheaded the team that invented the very technologies that allowed humanity to survive and even prosper in that endless black. She was there when we finally returned, the one who sent the message that told a galaxy that had written us off that we were still here. Her funeral drew millions, not just humans, but envoys from every species in the stellar compact, all there to pay their respects to the woman who helped reshape the universe. Mara Volkov Chen delivered the eulogy. Yuki Tanaka Chen was born in the void, she began. She never felt the son her grandparents were forced to leave behind. She never set foot on a real planet until she was 60 years old. Her entire life was spent in the dark, surrounded by dead stars and physics that shouldn't exist. Mira paused, her eyes sweeping over the massive crowd. But she never saw it as a cage. She never once thought of the expanse as a prison. To her, it was a laboratory. It was a playground. It was a place overflowing with mysteries, just begging to be unraveled. She would look at the impossible and simply say, "Let's figure this out." And then she would. Mira gestured to the towering memorial behind her. 300 million humans were cast out into the void. The vast majority didn't make it. But the ones who did, people like Yuki, they refused to let the darkness be their final chapter. They refused to accept that the universe had nothing more to offer them. They stared into the expanse and didn't see an end. They saw a beginning. She turned to the pillar, gently tracing her fingers over the carved names. These are the names of our ancestors, the ones who gave up everything so we could be here today. Some died lost in despair, certain that humanity's story was over. Others died filled with hope, trusting that their children would find a path forward. We remember them all. She stepped back, bowing her head. Yuki Tanaka Chen was one of the last who remembered what it was like before. She was one of the few who could tell us firsthand what our people endured in those first awful years. And now she's gone, and we have to find a way to go on without her. Mira looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But that's what we do, isn't it? We carry on. We remember. We honor our past by building a better future. Yuki wouldn't want us to mourn for long. She'd want us to keep asking questions, to keep exploring, to keep shattering the limits of what we think is possible. A small smile broke through her sadness. Rest easy, Yuki. You've more than earned it. We'll take it from here. The years rolled by, turning into decades, then centuries. The stellar compact grew, it changed. New species came aboard, old rivalries healed. Slowly but surely, the galaxy began to move on from the painful collapse of the old council, choosing instead to embrace the promise of a new era. Humanity changed too. The children of the void had their own children, and on and on. Each generation was a little different, a bit more in tune with the strange universe they were born into, a little more at ease with technologies that would have seemed like pure magic to their ancestors. But some things never changed. Humans still asked questions. They still saw the unknown not as a wall, but as a challenge. They still stubbornly refused to believe that anything was truly impossible. And they always remembered. Every human child grew up with the story of the exile. They learned of Elena Vance, who faced her accusers with unwavering pride. They learned of Marcus Chen, who held the fleet together through the darkest of times. They learned of Yuki Tanaka Chen, who unlocked the very secrets of the void. And they learned of Mira Volkov Chen, who finally brought humanity home. This story wasn't taught as a lesson in anger or bitterness. It was a reminder of everything they had been through, of what they had overcome, and of who they truly were. The story always ended the same way. We are the people who survived the unsurvivable. We are the people who built an empire out of darkness. We are the people who had every right to seek revenge, but chose justice instead. We are human, and there is nothing in this universe that can break us. 300 years after being cast out, humanity stood at the very edge of the galaxy. Not the umbral expanse. They had mapped and settled that long ago. Not council space, which was now just another region of the stellar compact. They had reached the true edge, the final frontier where the stars simply stopped and the great intergalactic void began. A fleet of exploration vessels gathered at this boundary, their crews a mix of humans, Velari, Kree, and a dozen other species. The old enemies were now allies, brought together by the new vision humanity had carried back from the darkness. Admiral Kira Tanaka Volkov stood on the bridge of the flagship, her eyes fixed on the pure emptiness ahead. She was a direct descendant of both Yuki Tanaka Chen and Mira Volkov Chen. She carried their blood, their legacy, and their unyielding spirit. "What do we know about what's out there?" she asked. Her science officer, a young Orium named Thex, consulted his readings. "Almost nothing, Admiral. The intergalactic void is staggeringly vast. The distances between galaxies are measured in millions of light years. No one has ever even attempted a crossing." "Has anyone ever said it can't be done?" Kira asked. Thex grinned. He'd served with humans long enough to know exactly where this was headed. "Yes, Admiral. Pretty much everyone says it can't be done." Kira smiled right back. "Then it sounds like a challenge to me." She turned back to the main view screen. The darkness waiting for them was deeper than anything she had ever imagined. It was deeper than even the umbral expanse. This was the absolute nothingness between galaxies, an empty space so huge the mind could barely grasp it. Her ancestors had faced a darkness just like this one. They were told it was impossible. They were told they would die. They were hurled into the void by their enemies, who expected them to simply vanish. But they didn't. They survived. They built. They became something this galaxy had never seen. "Open a channel to the entire fleet," Kira ordered. The comms officer complied. "Channel open, Admiral." Kira took a deep breath, thinking of Elena Vance and her promise that humanity would remember. She thought of all the generations who had lived and died in the void, laying the groundwork for this very moment. "This is Admiral Kira Tanaka Volkov of the Stellar Compact Exploration Fleet," she said, her voice steady and clear. 300 years ago, my ancestors were banished to the darkness at the edge of known space. They were told the void would claim them, that they would fade away and be forgotten, that humanity's journey would end in the silence between the stars. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. They were wrong. Humanity didn't end. We endured, we grew, we flourished, and then we came home and showed the galaxy that the dark isn't something to be feared, it's something to be explored. She gestured toward the emptiness on the screen. "Out there is the greatest darkness we have ever faced, the void between galaxies. Millions of light years of nothing, no stars, no planets, no pit stops, just endless silent black." A confident smile touched her lips, a smile that held 300 years of human stubbornness. "They say it can't be crossed. They say we're going to fail. They say we're aiming too high, pushing too far, asking questions that are better left alone." Her eyes shined with defiance. "That's what they said about the umbral expanse, and look at us now.
She turned to her crew, who were watching her, their faces reflecting that same fiery hope that had carried humanity from caves to the stars, and now to the edge of the universe itself. "We are human," she declared. "We were born in the dark. We were raised in the silence. We were forged in the void. And there is no void so deep that it can break us, no darkness so vast that it can swallow us whole, and no challenge so great that it will ever make us turn back." She faced the view screen one final time. "All ships, prepare for jump. Our destination, the unknown." The engines of 100 ships roared to life. Space itself seemed to twist and bend, and with that, humanity once again plunged headfirst into the darkness. Behind them, the galaxy they had saved faded into a speck of light. Ahead of them, a brand new frontier was waiting. The final message they transmitted before the jump was heard across the entire stellar compact, broadcast on every channel, for every species to hear, a message to be saved for all the generations yet to come. The message was simple, just a handful of words, but it was forged in 300 years of pure grit, survival, and finally, victory. We are humanity. We took the empty space between stars and made it ours. Now, we're doing it for the whole universe. Then, one by one, their lights faded into the black, and our next chapter had begun. Many believed we'd never hear from them again, that the chasm between galaxies was too immense, too cold, too final for even our stubborn species to cross. But the people who truly understood our history just smiled. They knew that somewhere out in that infinite night, human engines were firing, pushing us forward. Human minds were uncovering wonders no one had ever dreamed of. Human voices were asking questions that had never before been formed. Because that's our way. That's who we are. We're the species that was never supposed to make it, but did. We're the people who carved out a future from the darkness, the ones who earned the right to vengeance 1,000 times over, but chose to build a just world instead. We are the stubborn souls who looked out at the infinite, terrifying emptiness and decided to unpack and stay a while. And in whatever place waits for us after we're gone, you can be sure Elena Vance was looking down with a smile. Her people hadn't forgotten who they were. We had finally come home, and we would spend the rest of forever pushing toward the next star on the horizon,